Welcome to Compromising Positions. I'm Leanne Potter, cyber anthropologist and head of security operations for a major retailer.
And I'm Jeff Watkins, a cybersecurity enthusiast and CTO for a major tech consultancy. Together, we're the tech podcast that asks non-cybersecurity professionals what we in the industry can do to make their lives easier.
And help make our organisations more prepared to face ever-changing human-centric cyber threats.
This week, we're joined by Bec McKeown, a chartered psychologist with extensive experience in carrying out applied research for organisations, including the UK Ministry of Defence, and she's also the founder and director of Mind Science, an independent organisation that works with cybersecurity professionals.
In this episode, Hands Off My Amygdala, the psychology behind cybersecurity, we're going to hear about how Bec's varied and interesting career in advising people in highly stressful situations can help them not only learn from their actions, but to become masters of them.
This episode is a smorgasbord of psychological concepts that will make you think twice about how you normally run your security awareness programs and tabletop exercises too.
And of course, why people act the way they do during an actual cyber incident. We've divided this chat into two parts, so do make sure that before you finish this episode that you follow us for free on the platform you're listening to right now, so you don't miss this absolute banger of an episode coming out next week.
We love this chat and we think you will do too, so sit back and enjoy our interview with Bec McKeown.
We have a fantastic guest today. I met this guest actually reading a paper that she had contributed to a company called Immersive Labs, and she had a really interesting approach and I was so pleased to see it. She was the director of human science for Immersive Labs, and for those that don't know what Immersive Labs is a really premium cybersecurity training platform. And to me, seeing them meld the highly technical, which it is on their platform, you can practice playing around with malware, you can be on the side of the attacker or the defender, playing around in labs and things like that. To see them bring someone in like our wonderful guest and actually apply behavioural science and psychology to their platform was a really special thing. So Bec, who are you and what do you do?
My name is Bec McKeown. I'm a chartered psychologist and I trained at Cranfield University 20 years ago. I originally intended to go off and do some culture change consultancy as a psychologist, and I got seduced by working in high-risk industries whilst I was a student at Cranfield. So I started my career doing aviation research, so what happens when people panic after an aircraft incident and how do you get people out of an aeroplane quickly. So that sort of started my interest in how people behave in difficult circumstances. So I did that for about 5 years, and then I transferred to the Ministry of Defence contract that Cranfield University had, and that took me off down another different track of how people behave in difficult circumstances. And I did a lot of research into how people learn across the whole of the Ministry of Defence. I learned a lot about why traditional training doesn't work from that particular piece of research. I also worked with the cultural specialists, and what their job is to do is to go to not very pleasant countries and make friends with not very pleasant people, winning hearts and minds. So my job for that was to teach people how to build relationships with people that they don't necessarily have anything in common with. I also, from that, did some research into what is it skills people need to be able to work in an agile way in difficult circumstances. So bringing all of that together kind of took me into cybersecurity. That particular journey started when I worked on the Cyber Masters programme at Cranfield, and I was supervising student dissertations. So obviously I learned a lot about cybersecurity from those. Left Cranfield in 2019 and set up my own business, Mind Science. And I was sort of beetling along, thinking about what products I could build up. And along came Immersive Labs and said, hey, do you want to come and work for us? So I thought, well, why not industry? So I did that for 2 years. And then more recently, I've gone back to being self-employed at Mind Science. I think really the position I'm at now is the industry experience I gained from Immersive Labs, plus all of that research I did over 15 years at Cranfield, has left me with this overwhelming desire to think actually there's so much that psychology has to offer cybersecurity. And that's what I'm up to now, is trying to bring that human science into cybersecurity, but not in a way that is looking at security awareness and not in a way that's looking at what the hackers are doing and motivations. What my interest is in is the people who actually work in cybersecurity, because I don't see so much attention paid to that particular population as I do with everything else.
I mean, every single job you've done, it's like you could be made into a documentary. Like, it's amazing. Wow, Wow. I obviously know your more recent work, but your past as well. Amazing. That's some interesting jobs you've had in the past. And what do you feel like
Yeah,
that?
I've been very fortunate.
Yeah. So how do you feel like that past experience has had an impact on what the work you do today with the more human understanding of how cybersecurity teams work?
I think it's been very cumulative. This was never a direction that I would have planned to go into. I never thought that cybersecurity was of interest to me because technically I am hopeless. Anybody who's worked with me will tell you that. So I just didn't really see that I had a purpose within cybersecurity. I found out I did, but as I say, it's all that experience cumulatively. It's been building my knowledge over so many years, and then it's the novice expert differences. A novice playing chess will know certain moves. An expert will look at the board and see the pattern and know where the next sort of 4 or 5 moves is going to come in. And I kind of feel like that about psychology. I've had lots of little chunks of information, but I've been doing it for so long now that they've all come together, and it just enables me to see a far bigger picture, bring it all together.
Do you think that maybe actually, because of cybersecurity, from my experience, and I'm sure Leanne has a similar experience, has actually been most people have moved into it historically from a technical background. I feel almost like your story is actually coming from a non-technical background, coming from a different science. Technically, it's still a science, it's just not the one you'd expect.
Yeah.
Actually, is an advantage.
I think so. And I found that to be a case across every single type of job that I've worked in. I don't know anything about cybersecurity. I don't know what it's like to have to go through a cybersecurity attack. I don't know what it's like to work in the military. I've been out on exercise with them, which was quite scary enough. I've never had my life threatened in that way. I don't know how to kill people. I've never been a pilot. I've never worked in the airline industry. But what I have found is that people are the same. Our brains work the same. The way the brain works hasn't changed since it evolved. So it's the people thing that is important to me, not necessarily the area in which I apply my trade. And it helps in some respects that I don't know much because it enables me to ask the stupid question. Because I'm not that close to it, I haven't worked in the industry, I'm not so familiar with it that everything around it, I can't see anymore. And that's very much a case of how the brain works. It's a limited capacity information processor. It starts to automate certain things. So a lot of the work that you do, you don't even think about it. You have no idea of your capabilities, of your talents as such. You don't know what you see is your day job. So therefore you don't necessarily see, you can't take that step back and unsee what you already know, whereas I can. So I found that's been probably a massive advantage because I see things in a way that other people don't.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was just going to say, a recurring theme that's been happening as we've been recording this is people pointing out that the curse of knowledge is actually probably one of the most difficult things for cybersecurity teams to overcome. Actually, having that kind of unconventional background really does enable you to have that different perspective. It certainly helps me. I only got into tech into my 30s. I would consider myself non-technical back before I started working in cybersecurity. And I feel it actually is to my benefit that I can remember when all this tech stuff seemed really scary to me. And so it helps me develop a lot of empathy for others when they say, I don't understand what you're talking about, or this topic seems really out of reach for me. And it enables me to be able to put myself in their shoes. And I think the more that the cybersecurity industry recognizes the benefit of people coming from different backgrounds and what they can bring, not just different experiences, I can really actually imagine, I think we're going to probably come back to that in a question shortly, about understanding high stress situations like you were talking about in your airline research and things like that. Understanding what it's like to be an outsider in this industry is so incredibly important, because otherwise we're never going to change people's perception of us as a industry, but also the perception of the threat that's out there.
It's a really interesting one as well. I think eventually, because cybersecurity is effectively, there's a whole digital lock-picking element, as in, I'm just going to try and crack something, but actually over time the number of human threats seems to be going up. The figures seem to be suggesting that. I guess eventually, this is more of a philosophical question. People say, oh, well, I'm not technical, and then I hear them come out with things and go, no, you kind of are now. You kind of are part of the club now, eventually, but not necessarily in the way like you're going to go and configure a firewall.
Yeah, and I think that, to be honest, I think the pandemic changed life for all of us in ways that we could never have expected. And looking back and reflecting on that, I think that we've all had to get more used to technology in a way that we never had to before. I've worked from home for a very long time, so that bit wasn't new. What was new for me was the amount of people that are now willing to have a video call meeting with me instead of making me drive for 2.5 hours for an hour-long meeting. So I think that everybody has embraced that. But I also think the other benefit, I don't know if that's the right word to use because it was a truly awful time, but I think we've all now understood what a volatile, uncertain and complex and ambiguous environment is. And that's something, VUCA environment is something we looked at a lot at Cranfield when I worked there. But now I find it's much easier to talk to people about that because we all lived through that only a couple of years ago. And I think that it's sort of opened people's minds to the technology, but also the complexity of it all, and that things aren't straightforward, and that actually we do have to do work in a very different way because we're not living in the same world that we were living in 10 years ago. And I think it's interesting to see how that's changed very much over the past few years, but also it's interesting because there's still a pull back to the way things used to be. And that I think scares me a little bit because I think that we can't keep harking back to the way we used to do things. It is different. We've got to keep moving forward. I have gone right off on one now. I don't even know where I was going with that.
No, I think it's really salient because also as we've changed our effectively way of working, like the threat landscape has changed. People weren't necessarily implementing zero trust architectures because, well, we're all in the office. I guess so. What have your experiences been like engaging with security teams in the past, saying the good and the bad? And what is it like to work in like a really sort of controlling stroke regulated environment?
I think I'll go along with the controlling and regulated environment because that's a bit of a strange one. Working in industry in cybersecurity taught me, it's the first time I'd come across zero trust. And to be honest, I found it the most frustrating thing ever. Absolutely hated it because anytime I had to do something even very basic, I've got to put a Zendesk ticket in for something. I've worked with the Ministry of Defence. I had more freedom working there. I had more freedom working for a pharmaceutical company, which is also highly regulated years ago.
How odd is that? I've had more freedom working in the NHS than I've had in private industries.
Yeah. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Well, there's an argument that actually probably they're lagging behind.
Well, I would, in the case of the NHS, I felt like it was more enabling. There were still controls in place, don't get me wrong, but it was definitely more enabling.
Yeah, and I think that sort of kind of leads us nicely into talking about trust, really, doesn't it? Because I felt that actually what is the zero trust thing is quite insulting. Maybe that's me, ego, get over yourself type thing. But actually, I'm a professional. I'm in my 50s. I'm not stupid. Why are you treating me like that? Because actually that's not helping me to engage with you. You've left me with no choice but to do this process of reporting, but actually it doesn't make me feel that great. And in fact, it makes me think of something that Christian talked about in his podcast, which was if people hate something, they disrespect the rest of your rules. And it kind of sets off a culture, I guess, of that mistrust. And that to me is kind of wrong, really. There's some psychological theory about workplace psychology. It's called Theory X and Theory Y. So Theory X is that all of your employees are stupid. They can't be trusted with anything. And if you turn your back, they'll be skiving off. They won't work at all. Theory Y is actually we're grown-ups. We can be trusted, mostly. We have agency and we work much better in that way. So the more freedom you give us, the more likely we are to comply. And as Christian pointed out, that's massively counterintuitive. But I think that the zero trust thing for me is kind of almost going back to the dark ages in terms of work psychology, because you just don't have to do that anymore. So I think that you're probably right, and there could be some sort of balance between the zero trust thing and actually letting people, enabling them to do their job. And that I think is very much about this one size fits all approach to, right, stop everybody doing everything because we don't trust any of you. I don't feel that it's that great.
Okay, from a technical standpoint, I obviously get it. But from a empowering and autonomy perspective, it just causes a lot of bad will between my customers, and I call anyone that's wanting to engage with a process that's, to be quite frank, hindered by cybersecurity, as a customer. I worry about like the sort of long-term impacts, and I think yes, you're right when Christian said in an earlier episode about how they might not break that rule, but they'll break something else, and it'll just have a little ripple effect, and it is just bad will. But I even hate the word zero trust, and the language we use in security is just so so antagonistic. We call people the
Yeah.
weakest link. We say things like, people are stupid if they click on things. That kind of language is just does not endear us to other people at all.
Yeah. I said we all know about carrot and stick. What works, the carrot or the stick? You beat people enough and they'll comply, sort of, but behind your back. There's a saying, I don't know where it comes from, that you catch more flies with honey than vinegar.
Yeah.
The nicer you are to people, the more likely they are to respond to you. And in fact, that's one of the key tenets of influence. Robert Cialdini wrote some books on influence, and we like people like ourselves. And if people are nice to us, we feel more inclined to do nice things back. It's that reciprocity, I think, is the word
I did a whole talk on reciprocity, and I literally had to toe tap my way through the whole presentation to try and get the words out.
Yeah. But it's that thing, trust people, be nice to them. They'll be nice and trust you back. What's so difficult to understand?
Yeah.
It's a basic human thing.
Yeah, and it's that balance. So I can see from the other side of something like zero trust, which I agree is like badly worded. I think they wouldn't sell Coca-Cola if they just said this drink will kill you. If that was the brand, the brand name for it. It's not very well branded. But from an external attacker point of view, I can totally see it. But it shouldn't be, in my opinion, implemented to the point where it hinders you, like really actively hinders you from doing your job. And I think there's ways of doing it that don't involve you hindering people, legitimate users, from doing their jobs. I've seen it implemented both sides of the coin. But yeah, I think from an internal point of view, the lack of trust it's not doing the image of cybersecurity any good.
And I think also it's something I was talking about at a conference a couple of weeks ago was a thing called just culture. It's something that's very prevalent in the aviation industry, and regulators actually say you need to develop a just culture. And what that means is that it's a culture of understanding that mistakes can be made, and it's a culture where it enables people to say, actually, do you know what? I put my hand up, I've done something really stupid, and this is a result of it. And instead of giving them a warning, telling them they're stupid, you go, right, okay, that's fine. Can we sit down and let's work out how that actually came to happen? And if you run through things like that on a timeline, you start to unpick that there's a lot more to it than just that event that one particular person was involved in. And it's, if you've got the culture that enables that, what you do, instead of people hiding their mistakes and hiding the problems that are in your system, they'll come and tell you about them and you can fix them. So I think there's another way of going about things, but the zero trust and the people are stupid it's not happening. It's not encouraging that.
It feels like enabling a learning from failure culture might be more appropriate. Going with like acknowledging everybody's trying to do a good job and trying to do the right thing, and sometimes things happen, and how do you prevent them from happening again? And if you bury it, then it will happen again.
Yeah, I think so. There is always going to be the odd person that is there for malicious intent. They're going to do bad things. You're never going to stop that. That's human nature. But the vast majority of people won't be doing that on purpose. It will be some sort of mistake or some part of the process that doesn't quite work properly. And it might well be just because they're having a bad day, or it's Friday afternoon, they're going on holiday on Saturday and they just want to go home.
When I reached out to have you as a guest on a podcast, we had a little sort of pre-chat. And one thing that really stuck with me, something you said, it was, why am I, the non-security person, such a threat? And we sort of delved into that, and hopefully we can recreate some of that magic again. But you were talking about how sort of failures of mandatory training, and one amazing example you gave was being, how many times have we all been taught in an organization manual handling, even though that's not part of your job? And I thought that insight was really summed up. When training is done right, it's great, and raising awareness is great. But when it's unnecessary and a burden to your job, the impact on that can be quite detrimental to the kind of good faith you're trying to build up. So yeah. Why am I, the non-security person, such a threat? So why do you think the way we approach training people about cybersecurity makes people feel that way?
Well, anybody who puts the word mandatory in front of training is just asking to have everybody switched off anyway. I think, I don't feel too embarrassed to admit to this, but mandatory training, the email comes around, you haven't done it, your line manager's going to chat to you if you don't do it, so you get a free half an hour, you open it up. And I used to bang through that thing as quickly as I possibly could do and see how quick I'll get through it and still score 100%, because it's mostly common sense. And I've done it every year or every other year for the past 20 odd years. Did I care about it? No. Did I know which fire extinguisher was suitable for which fire by the colour on the label on the bottle as I walked down the corridor 3 seconds after finishing that training? Absolutely not. Not engaged whatsoever. And I know I'm not the only one who's had that experience.
If we're being confessional, I'm sure me and Jeff could probably say we've all played that game where we've tried to see how fast we can get through it.
Someone who isn't me definitely went through some mandatory training in the past and screen grabbed the material as it was going so I could answer the questions at the end. Someone who isn't me, I will stress.
Yeah. I mean, that's the person who wasn't you was actually, I think, putting a lot more effort in than I ever did. But yeah, I mean, I actually did some research evaluating some of the military mandatory training, and we had two parts of it to evaluate. One was very sort of, it was interesting because it was equality and diversity, so that sent me off down into the track of how I found out why equality and diversity training doesn't work. And the other one was the law of armed conflict, which is a law, therefore it is a set of rules. So you've got two things going on here. You've got one that's very emotion based, it's about feelings, it's about the way you've been brought up and your values, and you've got another one which is a set of rules that you can learn. So that's why we chose those two particular ones. And what we found is that anything to do with rules that you can learn and knowledge is very easy to do mandatory training for, as long as you keep repeating it at the right levels, otherwise you get skill fade. But what we found out is that applying that sort of mandatory training and the way it's done to anything that's got what we call an affective part to it, so it has an emotional component to it, you absolutely can't train it that way, because otherwise people just tick the most legal sounding answer to get through the training. Have they actually thought about it and learned from it? And the answer to that generally is no. What we found was, or what people wanted, was to do the equality and diversity, the knowledge part. You can read that anywhere. What they got the most out of in actual training, the classroom contact hours, was those discussions. So you have a group of people together, they talk about their experiences, everybody sees it from a different viewpoint, and hearing somebody else talk about that from their own viewpoint was the thing that helped change people's mindsets and actually had an impact. So when I hear that equality and diversity training doesn't work, it doesn't work because you're not doing it right. And I think that also applies in security awareness. That blanket thing, never going to work. Make it appropriate for whichever job role that you're training it to.
Yeah, I guess one of the interesting things is quite often practitioners end up designing and delivering the training. And I guess the question is, and I think it's kind of a slightly rhetorical question based on this line of discussion, is am I, say, the security person or the whatever other practitioner, am I the best person to design or deliver this training? And who do you think would be a better place to actually do that?
Well, it's an interesting question, because what we're looking at there is an either or. And when, again, doing some more military stuff, I've done an awful lot with military training research. What I saw being implemented in some places was where you had expert content writers working alongside expert learning designers. So what you've got, and I think this will be ace within cybersecurity, you've got the person who has the technical knowledge, because you do need to know these things, but they work alongside somebody who understands how educational design works, how to develop learning objectives and outcomes, how to measure that sort of thing, and also how to make sure that the training's delivered so they get feedback so they can actually learn properly. So I think that actually it's not one or the other. I think it's a mixture of both. And the other thing is, and the military certainly do this a lot, is that you can train technical experts in how to deliver training, but just expecting them to do it based on training they've had themselves, or the fact they can just stand up and talk about it. There's a whole process and a lot of research, and it's a whole academic discipline in itself, is how to deliver training. But there's no reason why technical people couldn't learn that.
Very much so. And I think there is an assumption, wrongly in my opinion, that, because throughout our education system, we see teachers all the time. They're very commonplace in our lives. So therefore, actually, we forget that that's an actual real skill, that these people, these teachers, they didn't just go to school and learn their subject, they learned how to teach. And I think the expectation of cybersecurity practitioners to knock up some security awareness training, or what's becoming a lot more prevalent now, is before companies make the plunge and actually hire a security training person in, is having that someone dedicate a little bit of their time to that role, but just letting anyone do it just because they work in cybersecurity without that understanding of everyone has different learning styles, people taking information different ways. How are you going to teach people who have a lot more a kinetic learning style in a remote setting? I wouldn't even know myself how to kind of tackle that. What are your sort of thoughts on how do we account for all the different ways people want to learn, all the sort of different ways of thinking, Also, even cultural background will play a part in how you ingest that learning.
Interestingly, the learning styles thing is very much more of a popular psychology thing. There's no actual science behind to say that you will belong to one category or the other. You will have preferences. They are preferences, and you may have several different styles. The thing that is useful about learning styles is to explain, it's got great explanatory power because we all do learn differently. So don't try and second guess how people are learning. It's more about providing a range of different learning. And also, I think this goes into sort of micro learning, which more and more people are becoming aware of now. Nobody wants to sit there for 3 hours looking at some PowerPoint slides. No. So what you can do is you have a virtual learning environment. You put documents that can be read. You can put podcasts on there for people to listen to. There's games that people can play. You can do research challenges, so they have to go out and find out things themselves and come back and share them with other people. There are so many different teaching techniques that you can use, and they can be done online, offline, in real life, or self-paced learning. That is the thing that's important, and I think it's about being creative and being in touch with your audience. I mean, obviously, I'm of a certain age and I learned from books and making notes, and I still revert back to that because it's how I get things to go in. Podcasts are something I listen to when I go to sleep generally, so they send me to sleep, so I'm not really going to learn much there.
Except this one, obviously.
No, I listened to these. I listened to this while I was painting the bathroom, actually, because I knew then it was something to take away the boredom of that, and they'll keep my brain going.
You hinted at that as you're talking there. One of the points that I find really interesting is gamification, and in general, but also then gamification in learning. Maybe just sort of delve a little bit into that and your experiences of that.
Yeah, I think it's great if it's done well. I came across one that was just done absolutely appallingly, and it was aimed at what I would consider probably to be 5 or 6 year olds and being delivered to adults. It's really got to be audience appropriate. We all know that people like leaderboards and winning medals and all of that sort of thing, but not everybody does. If you're into that sort of thing, then yes, fine. But people my sort of age, you offer me a leaderboard, I don't care. I have no interest whatsoever. So again, it's about that range of things. Gamification is another thing that it makes it a bit more interesting than sitting reading some dry text, as long as it's done right.
Yeah, and I think it can go really wrong. I've started reading a book recently all about gamification. I can't remember the chap's name, but he's really good, and I'll put it in the show notes. And it's been a good read so far, and he says there's a danger that people see gamification in terms of how your mobile apps are nowadays, like mobile gaming, in terms of actually it's just about the dopamine hit, just you're not actually learning anything, you're just trying to get to the next stage. And actually that's when that's applied to things like learning and development. People are like, oh, let's just add some gamification to this, that'll make it more interesting, but done badly achieves nothing.
And it's, back in the day when we were doing research into this, it was Serious Games, it was called. And it was called that because actually it was the gaming side of it, but there was also the learning side of it. So, for example, you can be playing a game, but if you get something wrong and don't get feedback as to what was wrong, then you're not actually learning anything. You just get stuck, or you're just enjoying the gamification side. So that's why you need to work with people who are good at learning design, because they'll know when to put feedback in. They'll know to have objectives. Therefore, you know that when you come out of it, you will have learned something. It's not playing a game just for the sake of it. So it's about having that understanding of learning design to go along with the gamification.
There's something you also mentioned very early on that really pricked my ears up, talking about studying how people panic. And one thing about cybersecurity, especially when you get maybe a dubious email and say, oh, please, you need to send me your details now because I need you to pay an invoice today, this hour. Fear and panic actually kind of is part of cybersecurity. I think it's a really interesting topic.
Yeah, in two respects, because in one, what they're doing there is generating that amygdala hijack. The amygdala is this tiny little thing in the middle of the brain, and that sets off your adrenaline to flow, basically. It's a whole process that goes on with that, obviously not quite that simple, but that sets, once the adrenaline starts to flow, heart rates increase, and then you have this thing called cognitive narrowing. So you stop thinking about everything else. Your brain just focuses down on the threat in front of you. So then you're getting that, oh gosh, I need to do something about this. You've got another cognitive bias, which means that, it's better to take some action than no action. So you are driven to press the yes, pay this thing because my boss just told me to and it was urgent. And then all of a sudden you've given the entire organisation's finances to somebody else. But that's what they're doing, is the way that they word it is to create an urgent need to react. So there's that sort of panic or it induces reaction type thing, and that's the social engineering side of it. And then you've also got the same thing that could happen if you're in a team that's dealing with a cyber attack, and it's that dawning realization that somebody's in your system, and it might have taken a while for that to sink in. You go and do your checks and balances to make sure it's not something that's just gone wrong. And then as that realization dawns that you are now under threat, that same process kicks in, and that also affects then the way that you would deal with whatever's coming in. So you're not necessarily looking at all of the information, you're just looking at a very narrow focus on it and just being pushed to respond to that particular threat. So again, this is kind of why I find the whole human thing so fascinating, because you've got the same process happening in the brain, but it's working from two different sides.
I guess what's the antidote to that, in your opinion?
Oh, there's plenty of people who can tell you lots of things to do about that. First of all, realise that there isn't just an antidote. You can just do a thing and it'll stop, because that's not going to happen. It's a natural instinctive reaction. You can learn to actually take pause, and the way that you do that is you have a think back afterwards. You think, well, what was it that set off that reaction? In the military, they call it left of bang. So what happened before it all kicked off? Because then that was what you call a contextual cue. It's your cue from the environment that's about to happen. So you might think, okay, I feel a bit panicked, or I can't concentrate properly, or everybody's running around like headless chickens, or hang on, there's a cue. That cue means that we're all going into this mode. So what we need to do is to just stop and fight that reaction to panic. And controlled breathing is a very well-known thing of how to calm yourself down, and to take a step back and to start putting things in place logically. Now, aviation people, pilots, have checklists, because actually going to that checklist and picking up that and working your way through that is enough to stop you reacting and going, oh my God, I'm getting lost with a plane, and, driving off in some completely wrong direction. And I think that that's where your cybersecurity playbook can be very handy, because it stops you doing the panic thing. You've got a set amount of steps that you have to do. That in itself can then stop that panic reaction.
I don't think I've ever learned so much in such a short space of time. That's so applicable to all the work I'm doing at the moment. Thank you so much, Bec.
Yeah, she was great. I did clock in compromising positions bingo that the curse of knowledge was brought up again.
And I think that's why we need more people like Bec to remind us not everyone sees cybersecurity in the same way we do. And if we keep making assumptions about how other people feel about our terms and the controls we use, then we're going to struggle to get buy-in. Or worse, cause rifts.
And cybersecurity is hard enough as it is without annoying people in the process.
Exactly. And yet, from speaking to people on this podcast, and now our listeners who are getting in touch with us, it tells me that people's experience with the cybersecurity team is, well, we've just got a long way to go before it gets any better.
We've got Bec back next week, haven't we?
We have. So in this episode, we kind of set the scene with the psychological concepts that Bec uses in the work she does with her cybersecurity teams in helping them deal with crisis situations. Then in the next episode, we're going to take those concepts and let Bec take us on a journey of how we can actually apply them. So look forward to learning how to run tabletop exercises, how to learn from incidents so they aren't as painful next time, or how to measure, or I guess not measure, your security awareness program.
Oh, sounds great. Links to everything Bec discussed in this episode can be found in the show notes. And if you like the show, please do leave us a review or a share on LinkedIn or in your teams. It really helps us spread the word and get high quality guests like Bec on in the future. And also, don't forget to subscribe on the platform you're listening to. That small act means the world to us, and it also means that you'll never miss an episode.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. See you next time. Keep secure, and don't forget to ask yourself, am I the compromising position here?